Hi, this is George Pianka demoing my fourth project for the Flatiron web developer course. For my project, I decided to take FitDish, which was my previous Rails web application, and apply dynamic elements through JavaScript, specifically Ajax and JSON requests, and using the jQuery library for things like animations and handling the output of those JSON requests, to add these dynamic elements to the Rails application. Essentially, we're using Rails as an API. We're getting these JSON objects, and then to serve these JSON objects that we're using then jQuery and JavaScript to grab and then manipulate and use to render data dynamically, submit data dynamically, and to increase the sense of sort of user engagement. So I had over here connected to Postgres, which is what I'm using for the database, and then started up a server through Puma. Let's go over here and log out for just a minute. So, like with the previous FitDish site that was entirely done as a Rails application, we do have the option to log in with Facebook. There are some issues right now with OmniAuth, so I'm not going to demo that, but I did in the previous video. If user doesn't have an account, they can sign up. Over here, we can sign up and just say, hey, let's call it guest email guest@email.com. Why not? Let's call it password for. There we go. All right. So as with the previous site, we have this menu bar at the top. I did add the option to dismiss alerts, and that's a JavaScript element done through Bootstrap 4, but you have this little kind of dismiss X-out box, which is useful. Let me go back to a account that already has some associated recipes and all that. So you are logged in. Okay, so we're going to X that. So again, we do have the ingredients index, the recipes index. Again, I went over this in the last video, but basically, like in the last application, what you can do is not only search by the name of a recipe over here, s'mores, or search by an ingredient that's contained there. Okay, here we got s'mores again. We can go to the recipe, and then we can kind of add it to dishes. We can like and unlike it. This was a JavaScript element previously that was done through JS templates, basically JavaScript templates, and that way, kind of using the remote true Ajax calls, we were able to do this in a very Ruby on Rails-like fashion. For these new dynamic elements that I added for the sake of this project, we didn't use that, and we kind of actually spelled out the Ajax requests and handled everything through JSON using Rails as essentially a JSON API. So we're going to go over some of those new dynamic elements right now. So again, as a refresher, we sort of load the root page here on the user page, or the grocery list, whatever you want to call it. They're both the same, the root home page and the grocery list page. And then you kind of have your grocery list. We have the ability here to show recommended ingredient substitution, which is a new toggle feature, but we don't yet have anything to show. So let's go ahead and in the old form sort of add some of these to our dishes. So here we can see that we added that. Let's go to the recipes index. And this is the old way of doing it, going through to the index and actually adding some of these recipes and having to go through a page refresh and redirect every time. It's it's slow, it's a little bit cumbersome. So let's go back to our home page here. Now we can see our grocery list is automatically generated from the recipes we've added as dishes. And that's kind of cool. And you can also go here, and this is the first JavaScript element that I included, where you can toggle through this kind of engaging button. That animation is actually CSS using the sort of pseudo class of span after. So we click on this, and boom, right there we load up these recommended ingredient substitutions. And again, no page refresh. I can toggle this. This button changes display based on whether it's been initiated or not, and go back and forth and pull that up if I want to look at some of the recommended ingredient substitutions that other users or myself have submitted. Now back to the, actually want to go to the recipe page for a minute and just show over here on the recipe page, we can actually here recommend a substitution without having to go through, this was the old way, go through the form at new, put in our fields, click recommend, it'll take us back, and you got 2-page refreshes just to get that action done. Here we go to recommend substitution, boom, right, pops up our submission field, and we can go over here and say, okay, instead of using a graham cracker, let's use cake. Why not? How much cake? A bunch of cake, I don't know. And details, reason, and again, this still gives you access to that autocomplete listing the ingredients available, as well as allowing me to indicate a new instead of cake, we could say let's do something else, like this would be horrible, but I guess let's do wheat thins. I don't know, let's do 2 wheat thins. Details, reason, I like wheat thins. Boom. So again, we can submit that recommend substitution. There we go. Recommended substitution saved. So that actually gives me the display field right there. I'm going to X that out and let's look. Oh wow, it was affixed dynamically. So basically, I can go recommend a substitution, submit it. All of this is handled through Ajax. The post request goes in. It's handled by the controller, and then here we go. We dynamically render the output of that, the display of the new substitution. And what's cool about this is you can also, if you were to say leave something out and you try to recommend the substitution here, we actually get these error fields rendered dynamically. Please try again. Quantity can't be blank. Ingredient can't be blank. Description can't be blank. I do one of them and I go, okay, I'm gonna replace it with 1 piece of chocolate scallops. That's pretty bad, but let's go here. Okay, quantity can't be blank and description can't be blank. Okay, why can I do one scallop here and then recommend? No, description can't be blank, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of cool to have that all dynamically, matching the dynamic element right here with liking and unliking, and having this is kind of cool. It's useful for user engagement. It's very fast. So let's go back to the dishes page, because this is where really all these dynamic elements come to play really nicely. So the idea with this page is you kind of have your dishes lined up so that when you do initiate your application, when you're out in the grocery store or whatever, here you have your grocery list generated, as well as being able to toggle any recommended ingredient substitutions and get that nice display with the reasons why and what's replacing what and which recipe it's a part of, in case you want to take that into consideration and swap anything out. But the key to this whole application is really this dishes page, user dishes, where you're going to be able to add recipes and then kind of see them displayed, delete them, go back and forth. You're basically dragging over recipes from the recipe index to your dish list, or your sort of like meal list for the week, or whatever it is. So dynamically, I can actually click the show all recipes, and what that's going to do is that's going to put out an Ajax request for the recipe index, grab that rendered JSON, which is done through active model serializer. So it's going to serialize that for us, bring it back, and then we're going to convert it to well, it's already a JavaScript object. We're going to convert it over to sort of model object notation using ES6 JavaScript, which is now widely supported, and that's going to allow us to build out these template literals and affix them and append them and dynamically render the results. So show all recipes. I click this, and it builds out this this container. This container is already fetched the recipe index and displayed it in very simple form, matching where we have our dishes displayed over here. What's cool is we're able to, and I had the scroll bar sort of customized here because I didn't like how it disappeared. People might look at this and say, okay, it's only these, whatever. So here you're able to scroll by, scrolling as you usually would in a container, up and down like that, or by kind of doing this thing with the hover, where you can kind of place. And this was all done through jQuery and gave me a little bit of experience building out some of those animation elements, as well as having multiple animations running, like this, hover one here that makes this container sort of border bold up, and then having that interact with being able to scroll through over here. These elements have to stop at a certain point. There's a queue that you have to deal with, and being able to handle and have all those elements working together without having them interfere with one another was a great experience. Here, this is kind of cool. You get this nice little sort of focus element as you go over these different recipes, and that gives you kind of this like stack of cards. It feels great. It's a good user engagement. I'm kind of like popping these up, looking through. And then if I click on one of them here, you can see kind of a drop down, right? But anywhere, I can click anywhere on this sort of list element. Boom. And what that's doing is, whereas previously these recipes had been fetched and serialized really in basic form, the data included didn't include many of the associations, just the title, the ID, that's it. And then when you actually click on the individual recipe, it shoots out an AJAX request asking for more information on that particular recipe, and that kind of keeps it really fast, so that you can kind of pop, this has already been rendered, but basically, even if we did say page refresh here, when I click on this, that's pretty fast. It's grabbing, 200 of these pretty fast. And then when I grab, this and look for more information, it gets the details. And here, not as many details as you have on our full recipe page, which, by the way, you can go to the full recipe page by just clicking on this. Right, there we are. We're now in a full page refresh. Here's the kind of layout of the full recipe with all these different, the ability to like. If I had added this recipe, I would have, like, let me go to one that as this logged in user, I added this one. So let's go to the recipe page for s'mores. You can see that edit field pops up. I can actually go in, edit. Some of these more interesting features are available through the main page. But when we're on the dishes page, being able to run through these and see them, and then being able to go, looking at the basic output here, let's go to the s'mores one. Let's say I go, let's add something else. Let's do caprese salad. These are done through Faker. That's why the instructions are a little irrelevant, but as well as the recipe being not so great. But we go over here to add to dishes, and again, that's one of those dynamic buttons using that span after pseudo element. But I can click on this and boom. So that's actually doing something really interesting. It's doing the AJAX post request, but it's actually passing params, and it's active model serializer really helps with that, because there's a little bit of a pain with Rails where if you submit like a parameter hash and it's got a symbol and you try to serialize that and put that in, it doesn't get handled right. And it complains about it, and that's because we're passing strong params, so we need it to actually be a sort of symbol dishes and then that parameter hash. But doing it through active model serializer is really easy. So you get this nice output with our caprese salad. We have these other ones over here. And what's really cool is, again, we could go through and do a delete on these just by clicking on this button, and that's going to do a full page refresh after asking if it's okay through this pop-up, which is jump through JavaScript. There we go. That's great and all, but what if I wanted to delete all? Well, I can actually just click this button, again, dynamic button. When I click on that button, what's going to happen is it's going to actually run after I confirm through here. I can cancel, I can confirm. If I click OK, it's going to run through and actually delete one by one and run that AJAX delete request asynchronously for each of the recipes that I've added to the dishes. So boom, there we go. And we can just X out these alerts. So that's pretty cool. The last really useful dynamic element that I added was, say we go to new recipe, okay? So we have this really kind of complex form, because with this form, new recipe, let's just kind of do a basic instructions. I'm just going to write anything. So again, with this recipe, if I go here and add a recipe, we have the usual, it can't be blank, whatever. What's really cool here is, whereas before it was sort of loading these blank elements for ingredients, saying, hey, there's 10 ingredients associated, and we would kind of fill those out and then pass to proc and validations to sort of ignore blank ones. Here we can actually dynamically generate those fields, and we're dynamically generating the field, still allowing for this autocomplete with the full list of ingredients that have been added by other users, and we can keep doing that and add as many ingredients as we want, or delete them in real time. So again, we can go in and just say, we're going to add sweet potato, one of those. Let's add another ingredient. Let's add our own ingredient. Let's say we could do nougat. Actually, that's already on there, but let's see. Kills there. Okay, cabbage. Oh, I got a lot of stuff going on over here. Let's just add pizza as a, what's it, pepperoni? Do they already have that? No. Okay. Probably spelled that wrong, but I don't care. How much? 3 pieces. And we'll go through and add that recipe. There we go, recipe created. And again, I can recommend a substitution in real time here. I'm on the regular page here. That's really useful to be able to do that dynamically. And again, back to the grocery list, nothing added there. Let's go to dishes, show recipes, and this is a much quicker way to just kind of come in here. And again, that focus, you can just click on that to bring it back. So here we go, boom, gone. It's just like a really great way of engaging with the recipe index and quickly being able to go in and say, yeah, you know what, I'm going to add that to my meal list. I'm going to, cheeseburger or whatever. Let's add chicken fajitas. How nice. And then we go back to our grocery list. Boom, it's right there generated. I want to look at some ingredient substitutions. Okay, no one's recommended any substitutions yet. That's great. Let's take that off. And that's it. There I have my nice grocery list panned out, and I have these great dynamic elements. And again, the key there is not only user engagement and making it kind of useful and the utility of it, but also just the speed. I mean, it's really easy to here just say I don't need all that information. All I need is specific elements of the information for each recipe when I'm showing this index, and that can really just lightning fast grab it and then get more information when I need it. So that's been demoing this project. I think going forward, what I'd like to do with this project, and probably will, is add even more dynamic elements and kind of really build it out. I'd like to be able to maybe just make a user portal where it's easy to do all these actions all at once, which would be fairly complicated because the recipe page, for example, this is a sort of 2-level deep nested form where you have an ingredient associated with a recipe ingredient. Recipe ingredient belongs to an ingredient. Has an attribute of quantity, and then that recipe ingredient itself belongs to a recipe. The recipe belongs to a user, and here, when you're adding a recipe, you're submitting, recipe ingredients, and also the ingredients that might be generated, new ingredient might be generated for each of those recipe ingredients. So being able to do that and have this dynamic form was kind of a real challenge, but gave me a good understanding of working with Rails, working with, for example, helpers, helper methods, and having them interact, seamlessly with templates and working on the Rails end, and then also with this JavaScript dynamic elements, really being able to get a grasp of how asynchronous JavaScript works, how it can enhance an application not only in speed but performance and optimization and user experience, and then just how to work through serializing JSON objects and and outputting them, and a good idea of ES6 syntax as well, which really gives you a great opportunity to, as indicated, here, kind of encapsulate your code within these sort of fake, well, not fake, but syntactic sugar classes. So these models, you can just kind of encapsulate everything, class recipe, boom, and then just document on ready, recipe ready, and then here we go. And it's really easy to get an idea of the code that way and have these prototype methods and then static methods, yeah. So anyway, that's been my demo. Thanks for watching, and yeah, look forward to, I guess, the last and final chapter of this web application journey, where we'll be going to React and working with JavaScript a little more in depth.